Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Global Visibility Overview webinar. My name is Alexander Fuller. And just a couple of housekeeping things is that currently everyone is on mute. I do encourage everyone to utilize the questions function of GoToWebinar. Um, yeah, utilize the questions function of GoToWebinar and ask questions during the presentation. I'll try to answer them in real time. This is going to be recorded and posted on our visibility announcement article, as well as the additional webinars that's coming later in the month. They'll all be posted there. We will send out an email tomorrow with the recording link as well as the slides. And we're going to get started. So on the agenda today, we're going to go through what is visibility in HMIS. We're going to kind of talk through exactly what visibility means and how it's configured. Global visibility. So what does that mean? The idea of global visibility. Exclusions to global visibility. Visibility impacts. And then we're going to talk through rollout, next steps, and then provide some resources and hopefully have some time to answer questions, any remaining questions at the end. Okay, so what is visibility in HMIS? Visibility in HMIS refers to the rules that determine which user and agencies can view and interact with the client's record. In community services, visibility is configured at the agency and project levels and applied across core data such as client profiles, entry and exits, service transactions, assessment, sub-assessment data. Visibility utilizes the provider tree structure, so information created at the agency level is available to projects beneath it. Any sharing across agencies occur only when they are explicitly included in the appropriate visibility group. So what this means is that if you look at the example that we have here, at level 1 is going to be all Chicago. There's no other agency or any other project that sits at that level. Right underneath the all Chicago level are going to be your level 2, the agencies. So that's where all users are created. So if you have a user account, your user account is tied to the level 2 of your agency. So ideally, that's where all information is being entered in, or entered at, is at the agency level. So when that happens, uh, that those answers flow downwards on the tree. So any subordinate projects under your level 2 agency will be able to view and utilize those answers. So at the level 3 is your project level. So users aren't created at that level. So ideally, if you were to use enter data as mode and lower your level down to a project level, at that point, the way that visibility works, since it only goes downward, you won't be able to view that information that was entered at that level again at the agency level, which kind of breaks the ability to report on certain projects or be able to share data throughout your agency. Another thing to kind of note at this point is that within the tree, so at the agency level, if we have multiple agencies, they all have their own tree underneath it of individual projects. Visibility does not go across these particular levels unless specifically set to do so. So by default, any information entered at your agency level typically stays there unless there's a setting that specifically allows it to be shared elsewhere. So this is the first step of how visibility works, is kind of understanding the levels of where the agencies sit and where the users sit in that level and how data is added at that particular level. So again, users sit at the level 2, the agency level, so any information entered there flows down into the projects that are created underneath it. Are there any questions before we move forward? Okay. So within that, visibility rules are applied differently depending on the type of information being stored. In community services, there is a difference between whether a provider can access a client-related object at all and whether the detailed answers recorded within an assessment are readable outside the project that entered them. This is implemented into two layers, so static visibility and dynamic visibility. So the slide that we just talked about was geared towards the the visibility of how data flows through the particular levels. Static visibility and dynamic visibility affects how data is shared outside of your agency and what data is shared outside. So we'll talk through exactly what each one of these does particularly. So for static visibility controls access to client-related objects in HMIS, such as the client profile, the enrollments, the entry and exits, client notes, case notes, um, service transactions. In HMIS, static objects are available to included providers across or according to the configured visibility group. For example, the entry and exit object specifically is visible or visibility allows other providers to see that an enrollment exists. It does not govern the assessment responses tied to that enrollment. So some examples again of what static controls is going to be your entry and exits, your clients, the needs, file attachments, and client demographics. So what these all refer to is that for entry and exits are going to be the enrollments. So again, um, the visibility for entry and exits only applies to the actual enrollment itself. It doesn't apply to the data that's captured inside the enrollment. So if you go into HMIS and you look at a client enrollment, you see that they're enrolled in a particular project, you see the start date, the exit date, that's going to be a static object. If you click inside that enrollment and you look at the assessment, that's not going to be included in the static visibility. When it comes to clients is referring to clients being created. So if you're creating clients and adding clients to the system, creating them for the first time, that client is directly linked to your project. If you're creating them outside of EDA mode, which you should be, is going to be linked to the agency level, so level two. So whatever settings are applied at that level, that's the settings that are going to be applied to that client you're creating. Currently in the system for clients, most clients created at the agency level are visible already. Is when you create clients in EDA mode, those projects aren't set up for client creation, which is why sometimes when you create them, they'll automatically be locked by default. Needs refers to service transactions and referrals. So again, is labeled as needs, but everything originates from a need when it comes to that. So a service transaction, if you create a service transaction, it automatically creates the need for you, as well as referral. So everything arrives from a need. Those can't exist without the need coming before it. So this would be an example of something that would fall under static visibility. So file attachments, client demographics. Client demographics is referring to what you see in a client profile, such as social security number, veteran status, the new sex question. So the demographic value or the demographic questions that are outside of the assessment. So some demographic questions that you see in the assessment, such as like date of birth, race, and ethnicity, that's not going to be included in static visibility. It's just going to be the items that you see within the client profile. Any questions before we move on to the next piece of visibility? Okay. Okay, so the next piece is going to be dynamic visibility. So dynamic visibility controls whether an assessment, sub-assessment answers are readable outside the project that entered them. It operates at the question row level and is tied to the client's enrollment and effective dates. This allows assessments to be pre-filled or pre-fill the most recent visible answer. Updates to assessment answers adds a new row rather than overriding prior values, allowing other included providers to view the history while preserving the previous entries added by other projects. So what all of this means is that dynamic visibility controls assessments, and more deeper than that, it controls the actual visibility of the individual questions that's on those assessments. So again, when it differs from entry and exit, static visibility is that you can have an enrollment visible to someone and it be, visible in the system. And when you click on the enrollment, the entire assessment is blank. That's not to say that the assessment is blank, because no one filled it out. More than likely is due to you have access to view that an enrollment exists. You just don't have access to the data that was added to that particular enrollment. So that's what dynamic controls. When it comes to how it operates in practice, so I have an example of a client assessment here. Typically, when you fill out a client assessment, you have the history bars. So, like if you have a blank assessment, you have no history bars because there's no history. The moment you start adding information into these questions, it starts recording the history of that answer, as well as who entered it, the agency, and the timestamp, which is the effective date of that answer. Those effective dates do play a part into um, the effective dates that might be tied to that particular assessment, the dynamic settings of that assessment. Um, but from a user standpoint, you'll be able to see those history values within the question. That's an example of your visibility to answers outside of your agency. Currently, right now, when it comes to dynamic visibility in the system for most projects, it's kind of like a mixed bag at this point where some projects have access to see other agencies prior answers, and then there's some agencies that don't see anything and maybe they're just only entering data for all of their clients and they're not pulling in anything extra. One way to kind of tell that is again looking at the history bar of questions. You can see previous um, answers filled in. And even if you go in there now and you see previous answers, that doesn't necessarily mean that there still isn't more data that you just don't have access to. So this pretty much kind of covers how visibility works. So before we move on to kind of what's changing, are there any questions about um, how visibility works in practice or just in general? Okay, Millicent, I do see that you raised your hand. If you could just ask your question in the questions function of GoToWebinar or the chat, um, I can try to answer it for you. Okay, so someone in the chat is saying that the question function is the question mark next to the timer. On my end, it looks a little bit differently, but you should have the ability to ask questions in the chat box. Okay, so I'm gonna actually continue until. Okay, so Okay, so we do have a question. My concern is how do we prevent other agencies from altering our records? So I'll kind of quickly answer this. We'll get more into that into our webinar related to best practices. But the way that you should think about this in general in terms of global visibility is that the values that you're putting into the assessment are essentially the client's, the client's truth, is the client's reality. So everything in there should be accurate. Um, or it should be entered, everything entered into the system should be accurate information. The only way that data ever is going to cross between two different projects is if there's an overlap in enrollment where those dates crosses each other. If there's a value in things already, then they're not going to be pulled in unless you don't make any adjustments. We'll talk a little bit more about that. That kind of gets into the global visibility part, and maybe I'll answer your question once we get there. But you do have opportunities to prevent data from kind of moving into your assessments, but ultimately, um, data in the system should be accurate. So no matter whether an answer came from a different agency or not, it should be um, appropriate for your enrollment, and if it's not, you do have the opportunity to update it. So we're going to get into the global visibility piece of it. So global visibility is an upcoming update to HMIS, which is approved by the HMIS committee as part of the Chicago COC's ongoing efforts to strengthen collaboration and improve client outcomes. This update addresses longstanding inconsistencies in how data is shared across agencies and projects. By standardizing visibility settings, the update ensures that unlocked clients' records can be accessed more broadly across the COC. Two things to note about this global visibility update is that this update applies only to data entered on or after the rollout date. And data entered before the rollout date will remain or retain its existing visibility and will not be retroactively changed. So what this means is that um, the day that global visibility goes live in the system, it's not going to automatically grant you access to uh, answers or assessments or enrollments or clients that you previously didn't have access to before. If you enroll a client the day before global visibility goes into effect, that client will not, be globally visible. They'll still retain the settings that they have currently. So since we went through static and dynamic visibility, let's kind of just talk through exactly what's changing with those particular settings so you can understand what objects in the system you'll now start seeing more information or the data is going to start being shared through. The first thing is going to be call records. So currently, right now, there's only one agency in the system that utilizes call records, which is the Homeless Prevention Call Center. So going forward, you are going to be able to see those records and enrollments. You're not going to be able to utilize the call function, but if a record exists for a client that was serviced by the call center, you'll be able to see those records and the dates. The case manager function, that's also going to be included in global visibility. So if you're utilizing that to or to identify case managers at your agency, or if you're using it internally, it's not a required thing to use. But if you are using it, that information is going to start being shared globally as of the go live date. If you already are assigned as a case manager to a particular client, you're not going to, or that information is not going to be globally shared unless you go in and update the case manager information. Case notes and client notes are going to operate the same. Case notes can be found in the goals function of the client profile, and client notes can be found directly in the client profile. Both of these are going to be globally visible. When it comes to client notes, just be mindful of what you put in the client note just to make sure that it's appropriate to be shared outside of your agency. Just because people are going to be able to read these again outside of your agency going forward. Clients are going to be included. So again, clients refers to the creation of clients. So as I mentioned before, for the most part, all agency levels, when you create a client at that level, is going to automatically default that client to have global visibility. What this update is going to do for clients is now it's going to apply to all projects. So if by mistake you enroll a client while you're in EDA mode, it's not going to prevent that client from being globally visible to everyone in the system. In cases where you do need to lock the record or the client chooses not to have their information shared, you would have to go in and manually lock the record. One thing to note about this is that anytime you create a client record in the system, so you're the first person to create this client or the first person to create and interact with this client, at that point, that client is directly tied to your agency and directly tied to your project. So what that means is that at that point, you have the ability to control the visibility settings for it in terms of locking the client record based on the release of information. Once that client interacts with another agency, so let's say another agency adds in a case note, then at that point you lose that access to be able to adjust the record just because now two agencies are tied to the client. So when it's only one agency tied to the client, that sole agency has the ability to lock a record, unlock a record. But once the client interacts with other branches of the tree, then it's going to require you to reach out to the help desk for us to manually lock that record for you. Client demographics again applies to the client profile demographic questions. Those are going to be globally visible. File attachments, I do want to say again, same thing as client notes and case notes. Just be mindful of what you're going to put in file attachments, just because if you were using it as a way to keep documents internally that wasn't shared, that's not going to be the case any further. So those documents or file attachments are going to be shared. If you've already uploaded things, that information is going to retain the same visibility settings that it does now, but any new information is going to be globally visible. So things such as like medical records, if it's not necessary for the client moving through the process or getting towards housing, I would not add that in there. For entry and exits, again, all projects are going to be globally visible, so the ability to see that an enrollment exists is going to be globally visible. There are some exceptions, which we'll talk about in a moment, but for the most part, all projects, if an enrollment is created, is going to be globally visible. Need status, again, refers to service transactions and referrals. Those are going to be globally visible. One good example of that would be coordinated entry referrals. So once, let's say you're a street outreach provider and you're working with a client to get through coordinated entry and get to permanent housing, you'll be able to kind of look at that client's referrals now and be able to see once that client gets referred to a particular permanent supportive housing project, because all of that is going to be globally visible to you. So we do have a couple of questions. Okay, so the first question is what is EDA mode? So EDA mode is enter data as mode. So on the first slide, we talked about like the levels of where projects and agencies sit and in the tree. So with agencies being at the level 2, and users are created at a level 2. So when you go in and you don't make any changes to your EDA mode, when you enroll a client or you add data in, that data is tied directly to the agency level. It's not tied to a particular project at your agency, it's tied to the agency itself. When you go into enter data as mode, you are kind of forfeiting that global visibility within your agency and limiting that data only to that particular project. So if you have issues with running reports or pulling all the information into a report that you can visually see in HMIS, more than likely is due to that data being at a level lower than where you're sitting. And again, data flows down, it does not flow back up. So if it's at a level 3, it's not going to go back up to a level 2. That's why all data should be entered at that level, the level 2, so it can flow down to the projects. What happened to agencies that serve DV families? So any project in the system that's serving DV clients shouldn't be entering data into the system at all. If you are serving DV clients funded to serve DV, you should be entering that client data into a comparable database. Okay, we have another one. If a participant does an assessment update, will the update be visible to others, or does the global visibility start with all new enrollments? That's a good question. So if you do an update to an existing entry and exit enrollment, that is not going to make that enrollment itself visible going forward. So if it's an existing enrollment and you make an update to that enrollment at an interim review, um, that assessment or that enrollment is still not going to be visible. But what is going to be visible, let's say you make an update to an enrollment after go live date. Let's say you update the client's income in an update assessment. That income is going to be globally visible, but your enrollment isn't. So again, with with the actual question answers falling outside of the static visibility and it's going to fall under dynamic, um, that question itself individually is going to be globally visible. So if another project goes to enroll that same client, they're not going to see any of the existing information that falls within uh, that previous enrollment. They're not going to see the enrollment, but they are going to see that income value. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Oh, okay. So you're referring to non-DV agencies that serve DV clients are able to lock down that client in the system. Yes. So again, if you have a client and they are DV and you're serving them in a non-DV funded project, if you're creating a client, you will have that ability to lock the client immediately just because you're the only one with um, rights to make changes for that client. If it's an existing client that came to your agency, you are probably not going to be able to lock the client yourself. So those are going to be clients that you'll reach out and say to the help desk and ask us to lock them for you. But clients that you're creating, you should have that ability to lock. Um, so yeah, any clients that choose not to share their information or DV or they're locking their record for any reason, um, you do have that ability to still do that. Okay, question. Can another agency mess up another agency's data? So another agency can't mess up anyone's data. So this doesn't give anyone the ability to delete answers from an assessment. If you're not the person that created it, it's still outside of your tree. That doesn't now give you the visibility or the ability to modify existing data. The only thing that could potentially happen again is if your enrollment overlaps with someone else's enrollment and that other agency adds information into the assessment and it's more recent than the information that you entered into your enrollment and the dates overlap, you are going to now inherit that information. Um, Again, overlapping enrollments in the system shouldn't happen in 99.9% of the cases. So if it does pull in due to an overlap or due to that, I would look at adjusting the overlap more than the concern about the data itself. Okay. And another question, will the visibility of dynamic data be there only for, okay, will the visibility of dynamic data be there only for the data entered after the rollout date, or will all dynamic data be visible retroactively? So no data is going to be visible retroactively. So anything that you currently cannot see in the system, you're still not going to be able to see that existing data in the system after the visibility rollout. Um, so only thing that's going to be visible are new items added to the system. Okay, so let's just jump straight into dynamic changes. So again, dynamic applies directly to the assessments, but more so than that, it goes directly to the questions. So the assessments that we've highlighted to be included in the global visibility are going to be your HUD assessments. So all of the projects, your street outreach, emergency shelter, safe haven assessments, as well as the updates and the exits that are tied to those. Your VA assessments, so GPD, VASH, SSVF, those are all going to be included. Your local funding, such as DFSS, IDHS supplemental assessments. So if you have those assessments as a second assessment to click on and fill out a part of your DFSS funding or IDHS funding, that information is going to be globally visible now as well. Um, Another thing to highlight with this is that maybe about a year ago, we coordinated entry did update the way that their assessments are displayed, and they're split into two. You have coordinated entry HUD assessments and then coordinated entry custom assessments. At that time, the custom assessments were set to be globally visible. So if you were to go into a coordinated entry enrollment, you can see the custom assessment be filled or be completed, but you wouldn't be able to see any data within inside the HUD assessment. It would be blank for you. Going forward, those assessments are going to be globally visible as well. So any data entered into coordinated entry is going to um, flow through the system. An example of that would be if a client goes through coordinated entry, they get their coordinated entry assessment filled out, they get referred to permanent supportive housing. Now, when that permanent supportive housing project goes to enroll the client, all the data that was captured during coordinated entry would be available for them to use in their PSH enrollment. So only thing that they'll be updating is things that are inaccurate. Another thing to highlight here is that we are also including the contact information assessment. Currently, right now, contact information is globally visible at the level 2, so at the agency level. So if you're in your standard mode, you're not in EDA mode, any information that you add to contact information is going to be globally visible, as well as you being able to view information that other people added. What's changing with this is that the contact information is now going to be applied to the level 3 and the level 4 projects. So your subordinate projects of your agency. So even by mistake, if you were in EDA mode and you enter contact information, that now is not going to prevent that contact information from being shared elsewhere in the system. Take a moment for a couple of questions. Can you clarify by what you mean by overlapping enrollments? It is very common for people to be enrolled in multiple programs at the same time, shelter, rapid housing. So when it comes to overlapping enrollments and like an example like that, shelter, rapid housing, that is kind of very common. That's not anything different than what typically happens. So someone be in shelter and rapid housing until they get moved to housing. So in those cases, you are going to inherit that information. Um, so if a client originated in shelter and they moved to rapid housing and they're still enrolled in shelter, um, if that shelter is updating information, so adding in new income or adding in disability information as updates, your rapid rehousing enrollment is going to inherit that information. If it's not accurate, then you would need to reach out to the shelter or reach out to the case manager and kind of understand why they're putting in erroneous data. So if you find that the data that they're putting in is erroneous, you should reach out to them and figure out what the issue is. But in most cases of, let's say, emergency shelter to emergency shelter, um, any bed-based projects, there should never be any overlaps. I do know that it does happen in the system, but there it shouldn't. A client can only be at one physical bed at a time or at one agency at a time. So ideally, those overlaps shouldn't happen. But the way that visibility is going to work is that if there is an overlap of dates, um, that information is going to be shared to your enrollment as well. Okay, another question. If an agency hasn't exited a family that is entering our project, do we reach out to the help desk? So we'll get into like best practices and how to use a shared system in upcoming webinar. But ideally, you're going to want to reach out to the ATA of that agency because, for example, if you're enrolling a client into transitional housing and that client is going to be staying at your facility and you're looking at the client and you know for a fact the client is going to be staying there and the client is still open in an emergency shelter project, you should reach out to the ATA of that emergency shelter project and have them close that client out because you can confirm that the client is not staying at that emergency shelter project going forward. Um, that ATA should be able to, make that correction for you. And then if it does turn into, um, something that doesn't get corrected, you can reach out to the help desk and we'll try to assist with supporting those changes. But again, the help desk really doesn't know what answer is right or wrong. So again, we rely on the agencies to work together to kind of figure that out just because you guys have the most information about the client and where the client currently is on any given day. Okay, we have another question. Are housing moving dates included in global visibility dynamic changes? So yes, so since housing moving dates is an assessment question that's going to fall within the HUD assessment, the HUD update assessments, um, the type of update is where you see like the update housing moving dates, but ultimately they fall within the update assessments where I have the housing moving dates. So yes, going forward, housing moving dates will be globally shared throughout the system. One thing that I'll touch on when it comes to housing moving dates is that ideally housing moving dates shouldn't affect your project unless you leave that date in there. So if you enroll a client and they were housed previously in the past and that housing moving date populates your assessment, for one, it shouldn't affect your project enrollment when it comes to CAPER reports or APR reports just because that housing moving date is going to fall outside of your actual project enrollment. But, but let's say it does fall within your enrollment. That is going to be available to you in your enrollment. And again, you're just going to want to reach out to either the agency that still has that client open and figure out if the housing moving date is valid or not. And then if it's not valid, they can remove it. If it is valid, then the client, you might have to talk to the client to kind of see if they're really housed or not. But again, any questions, you can always reach out to the help desk. We can kind of help assist assist with pointing you in the right direction. Will the notes we enter during the contact process get someone housed? Will the notes we enter during the contact process to get someone housed be globally visible? Yeah, so any notes that you enter into client notes or case notes or service transactions, those are going to be globally visible in the system. Okay, we have a question. Will providers be notified if an enrollment at another agency has occurred? So there's not going to be any notification to agencies to say like, hey, a client showed up at a different agency and for you to kind of look into it. That's going to be more so of something that you're going to have to review when looking at client enrollments. So if you're looking at a client enrollment and you notice that they have a new enrollment above yours, that's an indication that client is also going to it's also enrolled at another agency, and you can kind of reach out to them to kind of get the details of that. But there's nothing in the system that's going to alert you to client movement throughout the system. Good question. Okay, so I'm just gonna move forward just for the sake of time. So, with global visibility, there are going to be some exclusions. So for the most part, HMIS fields and projects will all move to global visibility after launch. The only exclusions are going to be RI and Hopper projects. So RI and Hopper projects will not have any of the settings that we talked about or the assessments included. So the assessments would be the HOPWA, all projects, emergency shelter assessments, as well as the RI, street outreach, transitional housing, homeless prevention assessments, and the exits and the updates for those. So those aren't going to be included. If you have a RI project, your project is going to continue to operate as it does currently today. Um, So yeah, there's nothing to be concerned with if you have a RI or a Hopper project. Everything is going to continue to operate as you do now. So by default, for a lot of the Hopper projects, if you enroll a client at Hopper and you're creating a client, they'll be locked by default. That's going to remain the same. So there's nothing that you'll need to do to be excluded. One thing to note about this is that with this being excluded, this does not exclude them from seeing new information. So if you're a Ryer Hopper project and clients' information gets entered into the system elsewhere, you'll still be able to see that information. It's just the opposite way around, is that the system won't be able to see your enrollments or your assessment answers, but you will be able to see answers from other agencies that are not Ryer Hopper. So immediate impact. On rollout day, providers will not see major changes unless new data is entered for unlocked clients. Existing data will keep its current visibility setting, so the impact depends on when projects clients begin entering providing new information. Emergency shelter projects are expected to experience the earliest impact because of higher client turnover, meaning new enrollments and assessments will start appearing in shared views sooner. Projects with longer stays, such as permanent supportive housing, will see changes more gradually. Reports due within the first 30 to 60 days will likely show minimum differences since most clients will not have updated data yet. So what all of this means is that on go live date, there's not going to be any real visual changes that you're going to be able to see to a client enrollment. So once global visibility goes into the system, you're not going to be able to go to a client record and see things that you previously couldn't see. It all depends on once new data is added to the system, whether that's an enrollment or if you're adding a new client. Any new instance of data is gonna, be globally visible. Anything that was in the system prior to that go live date is not going to be included. So The reason why we say emergency shelters are probably going to be the first ones to start noticing more enrollments or start noticing enrollments from different agencies that they might not have seen before in an enrollment or might not have known was in the continuum. They're going to start seeing that more often just because of clients moving around in emergency shelters from shelter to shelter. So those individual enrollments will start showing up. So we do have a question. What does RHY mean? So runaway homeless youth. So it's a youth funded program. As a HOPWA provider, will I be able to view information from another provider? Yes. So just because your data isn't being shared out doesn't mean that the same client, if they went elsewhere in the system, their data collected there isn't going to be shared with you. So you'll receive data from the global visibility or data being entered elsewhere in the system. It's just the data that you enter under your Hopper project isn't going to be shared out throughout the system. So long-term impact. So as global visibility becomes fully integrated, providers will begin to notice significant changes in how data appears and flows across HMIS. They will be able to view project enrollments from agencies and projects they previously had no access to, creating a more complete picture of client interactions. Reports reflect system-wide data available during enrollment periods rather than data entered exclusively by providers' own agency. Sub-assessment sections will populate with all values entered across agencies, greatly expanding the list of entries. The ability to view enrollments from agencies previously inaccessible, reports showing system-wide data for enrollment periods. Sub-assessments are going to populate more entries and hopefully to significantly reduce duplicate enrollments. So overall, the long-term goal of this is that this is going to give providers the ability to not have to re-enter data that was already entered into the system, be able to view agencies that they previously didn't have access to view. So long term, so this time next year, you're gonna have more complete understanding of the history of your client. So previously, if you had a client that got referred to you, you might only see coordinated entry. Going forward, you might be able to see the client interaction with projects prior to them getting the coordinated entry. So maybe an enrollment into street outreach that led into an enrollment into emergency shelter that led into coordinated entry and permanent supportive housing. You'll now have that full scope of a client once global data catches up to once the global data starts to catch up. When it comes to the sub-assessments, you are going to start seeing more values in sub-assessments. The way that you should think about it is that these are going to be instances where if sub-assessment answers aren't closed out, you are going to have to reach out to that agency to make sure that they close it out if that income is no longer applicable or that disability is no longer applicable prior to you adding in your entry. And then when it comes to duplicate enrollments, again, hopefully the ability to be able to see all enrollments in the system would, allow you to be able to make the decision at the time of enrollment to say that, oh, I see a client already had, or this client already has an open record at this particular agency. Let me reach out and see what's going on with that. Are they still engaged? Is this just an enrollment that just never got closed out? So being able to see that there could be a potential problem early just prevents, later in the year finding out that your enrollment overlapped with another project's. So a part of the overall global visibility work and the rollout, there are going to be some additional supporting updates to things. So one thing is going to be update to the HMIS access training. So users that's going through training, are going to have a new updated process and new material. So that is planned to launch on January 26th ahead of the visibility changes, which are going to include a privacy section, which talks about PII and making sure you're keeping data safe and, how to manage data in a shared system. And it's going to talk through consent. So there is a new consent form. We'll talk about it in a second, but it's going to talk through that new consent form and include an updated proctor and review process. When it comes to the consent, since we are making changes with how data is going to be shared through the system, the release of information did have to be updated to reflect these new visibility changes. So a new visibility consent is going to be released. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the coming webinar geared towards consent. But one thing to highlight about it is that it's going from two release of informations to only one. So previously you had your standard release of information, then you had the supplemental release of information that also needed to be completed. All of that has been consolidated into one release. So that's the only thing you'll have to worry about. In addition to that, we have updated quite a bit of help desk articles and added new ones. So at this time, 8 help desk articles have been updated to include updated information referencing the global visibility change. So anything that has changed due to this has been updated in help desk articles already. And we've also added 10 new help desk articles to help support providers in various different ways, from reporting to understanding data to utilizing a shared system. So we'll be sure to share all of that out as well in the coming weeks. Okay, so when it comes to rollout and next steps, global visibility is planned to go live in HMIS on Tuesday, February 3rd. So that's the current date that we have planned to launch it. If anything changes with this date, we'll definitely send out numerous emails, you know, updating the date. But at this time, we will be sending out an email on February 2nd, just letting providers know that the system will be updated that evening. We will then follow up on the 3rd to let providers know that everything was updated successfully. So again, when February 3rd happens and you go into the system for the first time, you are not going to notice anything different. It's going to be exactly the same. So you're not going to be able to see information that was already in the system that you previously couldn't see. Everything is going to remain the same until new data gets added. So we do have resources. One thing that I do recommend everybody just, sign up for are the webinars that we have planned. The next webinar is going to talk through privacy and consent. So it is going to talk through that new consent form that I was speaking of. So the one that got the two consents that were consolidated into one. We'll talk about what that looks like, and we'll talk about what the new PICLIX options are for that consent. The next webinar, we'll talk through using a shared system. So that's going to be more so of when you run into situations where data at another agency is conflicting with yours, how to handle those situations, how to be proactive in managing your data so those situations don't occur. The next webinar is going to talk through data accuracy and auditing tools. So in addition to visibility, we also want to make sure that providers have all the tools and resources available to review their data to understand what it's showing at any given time. So we are going to talk through, tools that we have available, reports, ways to review your data, check through it. And then the last webinar is going to talk through reporting impacts. So this is going to be specifically about the funder report. So like the APR, the CAPERS, the VA repository report, the RI report, PAF reports. So we're going to talk through those reporting impacts. That's going to close us out of the webinar series. But again, all of these webinars are going to be recorded and available on our help desk. So if you can't make any of them, they will be available for you to watch afterwards. But I do recommend everybody sign up for these, and if you have staff that are using the system, please encourage them to attend this as well, or attend these as well. Okay, so again, we have updated quite a bit of help desk articles in relation to the visibility update. So right now, I'm just highlighting the ones that are specific to this webinar. So as we go through the various webinars, those help desk resource links will be appropriate to the webinar that they're applicable to. So for this one, we do have the understanding visibility and HMIS article. So this article is going to essentially talk through what we talked about in the beginning of how visibility works in the system. It's going to provide a couple of examples. The global visibility announcement. So this is really just an overview of exactly what's to come and implementation of it and how it's going to be added in. This is also where you'll find the frequently asked questions section at the bottom. We will update that with new questions that we've gotten today, as well as questions that we'll get in the upcoming webinars, as well as this is where the recordings for all of the webinars are going to live. So we'll send this link out tomorrow with the slides, just to let everybody know where the recording is going to live. But yeah, just going forward, if you miss any of the sessions, you can always go to this article to rewatch them. Using a shared data system, important guidelines. So this kind of touches on another webinar, but I think it's important to kind of review now, just so you can understand how the expectations of kind of working together to ensure that, data is accurately in the system, and how to address things when those issues do come up. And then we have an article that goes over the HMIS user access process. So the new training process that's being implemented, this article is going to talk through all of that. Okay, so um, thank you everybody for joining. I am going to stay on for a bit of time to answer any remaining questions. We do have a couple in chat, so I'll kind of go over them. As a Hopper provider, okay, so we went through that one. Okay, so would there be any updates to HMIS consent forms? So yes, there will be a new consent form added, but we'll go into more details about that in the consent webinar, but there is a new consent form. Okay, we don't have any additional questions, but I will stay on for a bit if people are still typing them out. But for everyone else, thank you for joining. Please register for the additional webinars that's coming up. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to the help desk. And again, we will send out slides and the recordings from this webinar. Okay, so how soon will the HMIS form be available if we have to enter clients into the system? So the consent form is in so at this time the consent form is planned to release with the global visibility rollout. So ideally the 2nd of February that should be available. If you have clients that are going to be enrolled in your project or needs to be enrolled in your project now, you'll use the current consent for them. Um, just because that consent covers the current configuration of the system. So you're not gonna have to go back and get new consents for everyone. You're gonna just have the consents for clients going forward. So we'll talk through how all of that will work. Okay, I don't see any additional questions coming in. So if you have any additional questions after this webinar, again, please feel free to reach out to the help desk and ask your questions. I will look through all of the questions that we received today, and I will add the ones that I think are the most appropriate for the community or questions that will come up again. I'll add those to the FAQ on the announcement article so that they'll live there. But again, any questions, please feel free to reach out to the help desk. Again, thank you everyone for joining the webinar today, and I am going to end it now. Thanks again.